I don't do love. I hope you're aware.
I know I'm not interested too. All I need is the money for my father's treatment.
Good. Stick to the agreements and we'll both be fine.
Don't involve me in whatever is illegal or would put me in danger too.
You don't have a choice, do you?
If that happens, I'll shred this agreement into pieces and thrash it in my toilet.
He hired her to be his wife for 1 year and did not expect what happened after the year ended. She signed the contract on a Tuesday. By Wednesday, she had moved into the most expensive penthouse in Lagos. By Thursday, she was wearing a ring that cost more than her father's entire house. And by Friday, just 3 days after signing her name on 12 pages of code legal language, she was sitting across from the most feared man in West Africa, pretending she was in love with him. Her name was Amara. His name was Kang Junho. And what happened between them over the next 12 months would break every rule either of them had ever lived by. If you've ever made a decision you thought was just business, only to discover it was the most personal thing you'd ever done, then this story is for you. Stay till the very end, because what happens after the year ends, nobody saw coming, not even them. If this opening already has you hooked, hit that subscribe button and the like. You are about to go on a journey you won't forget. Amara Okafor was 26 years old when the offer arrived. She was not by any definition a woman who chased wealth. She had grown up in Surulere, in a narrow house with a zinc roof that sang in the rain, in a family that measured love in hot meals and laughter rather than money. Her mother had been a seamstress. Her father had driven a danfo bus for 30 years with the quiet dignity of a man who believed honest work has its own reward. Amara had inherited that dignity. She had worked her way through university on partial scholarship and part-time jobs, emerging with a degree in business administration and a reputation among her professors as one of the sharpest analytical minds they had taught in years. She had found a good job at a mid-tier consulting firm in Victoria Island. She had a small apartment she was proud of. She had a life she was building brick by careful brick. But life has a way of kicking the bricks loose. 6 months before the offer arrived, her father had a stroke. It was mild, the doctor said, as if mild could mean anything when the man who had been your entire world suddenly could not lift his right hand. Her father, the man who had driven that bus in rain and traffic and chaos for 3 decades without complaint, lay in a hospital bed, looking smaller than she had ever seen him, and the bills started arriving before he had even been discharged. The firm her father had driven for had no insurance provision for its contractors. The government hospital was overwhelmed. The private clinic that could give him the rehabilitation he needed quoted a figure that made Amara sit in her car for 40 minutes staring at nothing. She had savings. They lasted 3 months. She borrowed from friends. She sold her television, her laptop, her good shoes. She took a second job on weekends doing data entry for a small logistics company. She did everything a person could do before the point where they have nothing left to do. That was the point at which a man named Mr. Chukwudi Eze appeared at her office. He was soft-spoken, impeccably dressed, and he slid a card across her desk that carried only 2 things: a name in embossed gold lettering, Junho Holdings, West Africa Division, and a phone number. Mr. Kang Junho would like to meet you, the man said. Why? Amara asked. Mr. Eze smiled in a way that answered nothing. He will explain everything himself. Kang Junho was 34 years old, Korean born, and he had lived in Lagos for 6 years, long enough to understand the city's rhythms, but not long enough to be absorbed by them. He ran the West African operations of his family's conglomerate. Logistics, real estate, import-export, and 2 other business lines that were not publicly listed and were understood by everyone in certain circles to be the kind of lines you did not ask about. He was not cruel. This was important to understand about him. He was not a villain in the way that word is usually meant. He was simply a man who had been raised to treat the world as a transaction, every relationship a negotiation, every emotion a variable to be managed. His father had taught him this. The Kang family had survived 3 generations of Korean corporate warfare by being precisely this kind of people. Junho had never been in a relationship that lasted longer than 4 months. Not because women didn't want him. They very much did. He was tall, angular-faced, with dark eyes that seemed to be calculating something even when he was at rest. And he carried wealth the way some men carry muscle, effortlessly, invisibly, as though it were simply part of his body. Women wanted him for many reasons, but none of them could reach him, and eventually they stopped trying. The problem at the moment of his meeting with Amara was his grandmother. Madame Kang was 81 years old. She had survived the Korean War as a child, had built the family's first business with her own hands, and was the single human being on earth that Junho genuinely feared. She was flying into Lagos in 8 weeks for the signing of a major land acquisition deal. A deal that required the blessing of several traditional families who had been very specific about doing business with unmarried men. In Korean corporate culture, his grandmother's presence also carried weight. She had made clear in her particular way that she would not support a business expansion led by a son who could not demonstrate the stability of a settled life. Junho needed a wife. Not a real one. A real one would take time, emotional energy, and the kind of vulnerability he had no interest in. What he needed was a performance, polished, convincing, temporary. He had done his research on Amara Okafor. With the thoroughness he applied to every acquisition. She was intelligent, she was composed, she spoke English and Yoruba and passable French. She had worked in client-facing roles and knew how to move in professional spaces. She was not connected to his world, which meant she had no agenda. And she needed money, not from greed, but from love, which meant she would not be careless with the arrangement. He offered her 30 million naira for 12 months. A contract, a set of rules, a clear end date. When Amara sat across him in his penthouse meeting room, glass walls, the whole city of Lagos spread below like a circuit board lit at dusk. She did not say yes immediately. She read every line of the 12-page contract. She asked 3 questions that made his lawyer raise an eyebrow. And then she looked at Junho directly in a way that most people did not dare and said, "I want one addition. If at any point this arrangement puts my family in danger, my father, my mother, the contract ends immediately and I keep whatever has been paid." Junho studied her for a moment. "Done," he said. She picked up the pen. The first month was professional, almost surgical. They had scripted interactions. He briefed her on his business associates, his grandmother's preferences, the cultural protocols she needed to understand. She was a fast study. He noticed that immediately. She did not just memorize facts. She asked why. And her why questions went deeper than he expected. She wanted to understand the logic beneath the information, not just the surface of it. In return, she told him what he needed to know about her. Her family background, her education, how she handled social situations. She was measured in what she shared. He noticed that too. They had separate rooms. The penthouse was large enough that they could go entire days without crossing paths if they chose to. They mostly chose to. But then came the evening of the first business dinner. It was a gathering of 8 people. 3 Lagos business families, 1 Abuja politician, and 2 of Junho's Seoul-based partners who had flown in to assess the Lagos operation. The table was set in the private dining room of a hotel that cost more per night than Amara's monthly salary had been. The food arrived in courses. The conversation arrived in layers, surface talk, probing questions beneath it, then the real conversation underneath that. Amara had been briefed. She knew her role: supportive wife, intelligent but not assertive, warm but not familiar, background music essentially. Except that at the 40-minute mark, one of the sole partners, a man named Director Park, with the smooth arrogance of someone who had been powerful for too long, turned to her and said in English, with a thin smile, "Junho tells us you are in business consulting. Tell me, what do you actually know about logistics margins in a frontier market?" It was a dismissal dressed as a question. Everyone at the table felt it. Amara smiled, and then she answered. For 4 minutes, she spoke with the calm, specific fluency of someone who had spent 3 years analyzing exactly this kind of data. She cited figures. She named 2 operational bottlenecks in the Lagos port system that were not public knowledge. She offered a structural comparison between Lagos and Mombasa that made Director Park set down his wine glass. When she finished, the table was quiet. Junho looked at her from across the table with an expression she had not seen on his face before. Later, in the car home, he said nothing for a long time. Then, "You didn't have to do that." "He was being rude," Amara said simply. "He is a major shareholder." "He was still being rude." Another silence. "You were right about the port bottlenecks," Junho said finally. Amara looked out the window at the city going by. "I know," she said. The second month brought his grandmother. Madame Kang was small, white-haired, and moved through rooms with the quiet authority of someone who had long since stopped needing to prove anything. She spoke Korean, some English, and had, over 81 years, developed an instinct for dishonesty that could not be fooled by preparation or performance. She arrived on a Thursday morning, and by Thursday afternoon, she had sat across from Amara at the dining table, poured 2 cups of tea, and said, in careful, deliberate English, "Tell me about the first time you knew you loved my grandson." This is the moment this story's heart cracks open. If you are feeling this, drop a comment right now. I'm watching. Let's see who makes it to the end. Junho was not in the room. He had been called away to a call with his sole office. It was just the 2 women, the tea, and the question hanging in the air between them like smoke. Amara understood immediately that this was a test. Madame Kang's eyes were too still, too watching. She had not asked the question carelessly. Amara could have given a rehearsed answer. She had several prepared for this. She had prepared for exactly this kind of question. Instead, she set down her teacup. "The first time I knew," she said slowly, "was when I was angry with him." Madame Kang did not react. She waited. "He made a decision that affected someone I care about without asking me," Amara continued. "I confronted him. I expected him to dismiss me. He is a man who is used to making decisions and having them accepted. But he stopped. He actually listened. He didn't agree with me, but he listened. And I thought, this person is capable of something I didn't think he was capable of. That was when I knew something had changed." The room was quiet. Madame Kang picked up her tea, took a sip, set it down. "That is a real answer," she said. "Most people give me stories about sunsets and flowers." She looked at Amara with something new in her eyes. "You are more than he knows." It was only later, much later, that Amara would understand what the old woman had seen that afternoon. By the 4th month, the lines had begun to blur. Not dramatically, not in the way of romantic films, where 2 people look at each other across a room and suddenly understand everything. It happened in smaller moments, the kind that accumulates without permission. It happened the morning Junho came home at 2 a.m. from a business emergency and found Amara awake at the kitchen island, her laptop open, working on something. He asked what she was doing. She said she had been analyzing the logistics data from the land deal because she thought there was a structural inefficiency nobody had noticed. He sat down. They talked for 2 hours. He went to bed at 4 a.m. with 3 new approaches to a problem he had been staring at for weeks. It happened the Sunday she took him to Surulere to visit her parents. He had not expected to go. It was not in the contract, but she had asked, quietly, whether he would come. Not as performance, she said, but because her father had started asking about the husband she had mentioned, and she did not want to keep lying to a man who was still recovering from a stroke. Junho went. Her father, seated in a plastic chair in the small courtyard of the family house, received him with a gravity that had nothing to do with wealth or status. He asked Junho simple questions. Where did he come from? What did he believe? What did he want from his life? Junho, who negotiated with government and spoke in boardrooms without blinking, answered these simple questions with an awkwardness he could not explain. Something about the man's directness unsettled him. As they were leaving, Amara's mother pressed a small package of chin-chin into Junho's hands, the kind of gesture people make when they are accepting you, quietly, without ceremony. He held the package all the way home. That night, he stood in his kitchen, eating chin-chin at midnight, and thought about a feeling he did not have a business word for. The 6th month was when everything nearly collapsed. His name was Tai Yang. He was Junho's younger brother, and he arrived from Seoul without warning on a Thursday with a loose smile of a man who was always arriving somewhere without warning. Tae Yang knew about the contract. He was one of 2 people who did, and he thought it was, as he said with a laugh over his first glass of whiskey, the most Junho has ever done. But Tae Yang also had debts, the kind accumulated through bad investments and a taste for expensive things. And when he saw Amara moving through his brother's penthouse with the ease of a woman who had made herself at home in a space, something calculated moved across his eyes. He found her alone the next morning and made his offer with the smoothness of a man who had made this kind of offer before. He would tell his grandmother the truth about the contract. He would expose the arrangement, unless, of course, Amara made it worth his while not to. He named the figure. Amara looked at him for a long moment. "I see," she said. She went to Junho's office. She knocked. She sat down. She told him everything. Exactly what had happened, exactly what Tae Yang had said, exactly the figure he had named. She did not perform emotion. She simply reported the facts and waited. Junho's face did not move, not a muscle. He thanked her. He asked her to give him the afternoon. What happened between the 2 brothers that afternoon? The details were never fully known. But Tae Yang left the penthouse by evening and he did not return. That night, Junho came to the living room where Amara was reading. He sat down across from her. "You could have gone to Tae Yang," he said, taking his money, walked away. "No," she said. "Why not?" She looked up from her book. "Because it would have been wrong." He looked at her with that calculating expression she had come to read more accurately over the months. And she saw beneath it something that looked like a man coming face to face with his own reflection and not recognizing what he saw. If this story is hitting different right now, if you feel like you know these people, share this video. Someone needs to see this story today. The 9th month was when they stopped pretending, not with each other, with themselves. It had been building in the small gestures, the way he brought her coffee without being asked, the way she had started leaving notes beside his keyboard when she noticed something in a report that she thought he'd missed, the way they had developed shorthand for things without deciding to, the way she had started knowing from across a room when something was wrong, not from his words, but from the angle of his shoulders. Junho did not understand what was happening to him in the vocabulary he had always used. Transactions he understood, conditions and clauses and exit strategies. Those were his languages. What was growing in him had no clause, no exit, no term limit. He was terrified. He handled the terror by becoming colder, more businesslike. He stopped the coffee. He stopped the small conversations. He answered her questions briefly and professionally, as if they were colleagues who had not spent 9 months learning the texture of each other's silence. Amara understood what was happening. She was not confused by it. She had watched her father love her mother for 28 years, and she knew what love looked like when it was scared, or when it scared a person. It looked exactly like this: a retreat that was desperate and obvious and entirely unconvincing. She said nothing. She gave him space, but she did not pull back. She was there when he came home late. She was there at the kitchen island when he couldn't sleep. She was simply, consistently, undeniably present, not pushing, not performing, just there, like a constant. He did not know what to do with a constant. The letter arrived on the first day of the 12th month. It was from the law firm handling the contract, a reminder of the approaching end date, a checklist of obligations for the dissolution process, clean, professional, cold. Junho read it at his desk and sat with it for a long time. He had structured this arrangement with precision, an end date, a clear separation, no entanglement. He had been so certain 12 months ago that this was what he wanted. He left the letter on his desk and walked to the living room. Amara was standing at the window looking out at the city. The late afternoon light was doing something to the room, that particular Lagos light, gold and alive, and she was standing very still in it. And Junho stepped in the doorway and watched her for a moment before she heard him. She turned. "I got the letter," she said. "So did I." They looked at each other across the room with the weight of 12 months between them. Every conversation, every silence, every small truth, every carefully kept distance. "I think," Junho said and stopped. He was not a man who said incomplete sentences. She waited. "I think I made a mistake," he said. "Not the contract. The reason for the contract. The reason I designed my life so that everyone had an exit. I thought that was how you stay safe. I thought that was how you stayed in control." He paused. "I was wrong." Amara was quiet for a long time. "I know," she said softly. "I don't want the year to end," he said. And then, because the words were insufficient for what he meant, he crossed the room. He stood in front of her. "I don't know how to do this," he said. "I have no framework for this. I don't have a contract for this." Amara looked up at him with something that had been in her eyes for months, patient, clear, like someone who had already made a decision and had been waiting for the other person to arrive at the same place. "You don't need a contract for this," she said. His grandmother called the next morning from Seoul. She had returned to Korea 3 months earlier after the land deal was signed, but she had watched. She had always been watching. "I spoke with the lawyer," she said to Junho in Korean. "I know about the contract." The silence on the phone was absolute. "I knew before I arrived," she said, "from the first week." "How money?" The girl answered my question with truth, she said. When someone gives you a true answer, you recognize it. I was waiting to see what would happen to you both. A pause. "You surprised me, Junho. I did not think you were capable of growing. I am glad I was wrong." She hung up. Junho sat in his office for a long time. Then he laughed, quietly to himself, for only the second or third time in his adult life. They did not have a grand ceremony or a dramatic declaration. What they had was simpler and more real than that. On the last official day of the contract, they went to Surulere. Not for any performance. The performance was over. They went because Amara's father had asked them to come for dinner, and he had said it with a warmth that suggested he, too, had seen more clearly than either of them had known. Amara's mother made egusi soup and fried plantain, and a small pot of jollof rice that perfumed the entire house. Amara's father sat in his chair in the courtyard, his right hand stronger now from months of rehabilitation paid for by money that had changed two lives in ways its original purpose had never intended. Junho sat with the old man as the evening came in. The city hummed around the narrow house with its zinc roof. And somewhere inside, Amara and her mother laughed about something. The sound floating out in the courtyard like a gift. "You are staying?" Amara's father asked him. "Not in Lagos, not in Nigeria." He was asking something much larger. Junho looked at the old man. This man who had driven a bus for 30 years with quiet dignity, who had raised a daughter capable of standing in the middle of a life she had not chosen and choosing to be her whole self anyway. And he answered without hesitation. "Yes," he said, "I am staying." Here is what the contract had never accounted for. That the woman Junho hired to perform a life could not be reduced to a performance. That when you share space with a person who is genuinely themselves, who brings their full mind to a dinner table, who tells the truth to your grandmother, who reports a truth without calculation because it is simply the right thing to do, who stands at your window in the light of a city she loves, something in you recognizes them. Not with the part of you that calculates and contracts the manages. Not with the part of you that calculates and contracts and manages. With the part underneath. The part that does not know how to lie. And here is what Amara had never expected. That beneath the cold precision of the man she had agreed to perform beside, there was someone who had simply never been taught a language for the things he felt. That sometimes what looks like a man without a heart is a man who was never given permission to use it. That permission, given quietly and consistently without demand, over 12 months of shared mornings and late nights and honest words, permission is nothing. Permission sometimes is everything. They renewed the contract once, with very different terms. No end date, no exit clause, no fee. Just two signatures, freely given on a single page. Amara kept the pen. If this story moved you, if you believe that real things can grow in unexpected places, subscribe to this channel, drop a like, and share this video with someone who needs to hear it today. More stories like this are coming and you don't want to miss them. The comment section is open. Tell us, did you believe in them from the beginning or did they earn it? Some contracts are signed in ink. The ones that matter are signed in time.